Department of Refugee Affairs commenced the registration of refugees in Kenya in 2011. Your Excellency, the Department of Refugee Affairs, UNHCR, together with other international organizations, assists refugees in Kenya by providing support in the camps and to the recent returnees and their communities in neighboring Somalia and South Sudan. The assistance given includes food, shelter, clothing, medical care, education, and protection. The Government of Kenya and UNHCR's strategic partnership focuses on supporting and strengthening the response capacity of local and national institutions, and jointly pursuing durable solutions for refugees, including potential return to Somalia. Distinguished delegates, the tripartite agreements signed between the UN Refugee Agency and the governments of Kenya and Somalia establishes a legal framework and other support for Somali refugees in Kenya who might eventually wish to return to their homeland. It defines the roles and responsibilities of the three parties in accordance with international standards. This means any refugee has the right to choose whether to go home after they have been given information about conditions on the ground in Somalia so they can make an informed decision. It also means return should be conducted in safety and dignity. Since January 2014, a total of 667 individuals have been submitted to a UNHCR branch office in Nairobi for onward resettlement. The pledges have been received from 7 countries, that is Australia, Canada, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, UK, and the US. Distinguished delegates, in summary, Kenya faces the following challenges caused by the presence of refugees. 1. Insecurity and increased terrorist threat. 2. Strain on the registration process. 3. Spontaneous resettlement and conflict with the host community. 4. Environmental degradation and depletion of natural resources. 5. Insufficient essential services. 6. Entanglement with Kenyan citizens, protracted refugee status, and outbreak of infectious diseases. The Government of Kenya, in partnership with humanitarian agencies and the UNHCR, has undertaken various remedial measures, including provision of more land by the Government of Kenya to ease congestion in the existing camps, increased provision of security by the government. In liaison with the UNHCR, the government increased the capacity of reception and registration of asylum seekers so as to enable them access humanitarian assistance. The government, in coordination with the UNHCR and other non-governmental organizations, put up additional facilities to provide protection, relief, and other social services, including food, water, health care, education, and shelter. Nutritional centers were opened to cater for provisions of highly malnourished children. The Kenyan government, in coordination with humanitarian agencies, increased the capacity for quick medical screening and facilitates emergency health care by non-governmental organizations. Kenya is also currently undertaking review of the Refugees Act and developing a national refugee policy for the proper management of the refugees. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Kenya. Nigeria, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for the opportunity to make this short statement on the agenda item. May I first thank the Secretariat for its wide-ranging and incisive report on the agenda item, which gives an objective but worrying overview of the situation of refugees and internally displaced persons in our 2 continents today. Madam President, my delegation observes that paragraph 17 of the report refers to the security challenges in Nigeria's northeast region, which has led to the spillover of about 10,000 refugees into the neighboring countries of Niger and Cameroon. My delegation is grateful for the interest and concern of ALCO at the situation in the region. We also thank agencies such as the ICRC and UNHCR for the commendable work they have done to support the Nigerian government in coping with the humanitarian issue. Madam President, this issue was highlighted by my delegation as constituting one of the ruinous effects of terrorism on the dignity of our people in the affected area and on the economy of our nation. This humanitarian angle of the crisis is one of the strongest reasons why Nigeria urges the international community to ensure greater collaboration and cooperation in minimizing and confronting international terrorism wherever it occurs in order to preserve the dignity of people everywhere in our world and secure their right to peaceful existence. Madam President, my delegation wishes to assure ALCO that the Nigerian government is already taking steps to restore normalcy in the affected areas, particularly through the ongoing security operations to flush out the terrorists from the region. The majority of internally displaced persons and refugees generated by this conflict has been due to the tactics of the terrorists in attacking innocent villagers in remote areas of the region in a campaign of mindless terror. On its part, the government, through the National Emergency Management Agency, other federal and state specialized agencies, is providing relief materials to IDPs within Nigeria and ensuring that in cases where the education of students has been negatively affected, they are relocated. On the regional front, Nigeria is liaising with Cameroon and Niger to ensure the welfare of its citizens who, because of the proximity of the conflict area, have crossed over into these two countries. We wish to acknowledge the fact that both friendly countries, Cameroon and Niger, have continued to abide by their obligations under the African Union's Kampala Convention and applicable United Nations instruments on the treatment of refugees. We therefore welcome the proposed resolution to place this item on the provisional agenda of the 54th annual session. Madam President, my delegation wishes to assure this organization that pursuant to the current efforts of the Nigerian government and increased regional and international collaboration, the situation will soon be restored to normalcy and displaced people will be able to return to their communities to live in peace. Madam President, distinguished delegates, I thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Nigeria. We are making very good time. We will receive contributions from India and Egypt, and then we'll give an opportunity to UNHCR and ICRC to make very, very brief comments in view of time constraints. So let me invite the distinguished delegate from India to make your comments.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. First of all, I would like to thank Madam Deputy Secretary General for presenting report on this subject. Madam Vice President, India is deeply concerned about the hardships and sufferings of refugees around the world. India is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention or its protocol. However, India's record in dealing with refugees has been exemplary. India stands steadfast in its commitment to provide humanitarian assistance to refugees. We continue to host a large number of refugees with all arrangements made out of our own resources. Madam Vice President, the right to life and equality granted under the Indian Constitution are applicable to refugees as they are applicable to our own citizens. The scope and ambit of Articles 14 and 21 of the Indian Constitution through judicial interpretation extend to non-citizens also. India regards the two international instruments on refugees as only a partial regime for refugee protection. These instruments are designed primarily to deal with individual cases and not with situations of mass influx. They do not adequately deal with the situations faced by developing countries and in particular situations of mixed flows without distinction between refugees and economic migrants. Besides, there is no balance between rights and obligations of receiving and the source states. The concept of international solidarity and burden sharing has not been developed adequately in the Convention. The Convention fails to address the question of minimum responsibility of states not to create refugees flows and of cooperation with other states in the resolution of refugee problem. The obligation to grant rights to the refugees on par with national citizens puts an onerous burden on the receiving state. Madam Vice President, although the Convention provides that a refugee ceases to be so when the conditions under which he had been recognized as refugee ceases to exist, it also provides that contracting states should facilitate assimilation and naturalization of refugees. Thus, the possibility of having to integrate a large population of refugees when voluntary repatriation and resettlement are not available needs to be envisaged. Given the diversity of religious, ethnic, and linguistic mix and the jostle for economic space, this could create real problems if flexibility of approaches is not available to the concerned governmental implementing agencies. Madam Vice President, India's protection regime is based on the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution and other relevant legal provisions. We have clearly demonstrated our abiding commitment to the principles of protection and non-refoulement. The decision to grant all UNHCR mandate to refugees in urban areas the opportunity to apply for long-stay visas of 1 year renewable duration augments the protection space considerably. These long-stay visas allow refugees to work in the private sector and enroll in any academic institutions. India continues to refine its administrative mechanisms for providing greater hospitality to refugees during their stay in the country. Madam Vice President, India welcomes and fully supports the initiative of UNHCR to address the need of humanitarian assistance to refugees. We also commend the UNHCR for handling massive humanitarian situation involving large numbers of women and children with the care and sensitivity that such situations demand. Lastly, on the issue of internally displaced persons, it may be noted that India raised its concern on the guiding principles on IDPs formulated by the experts. As not approved at the intergovernmental level, they are not legally binding. Further, on IDPs, it's our considered view, Madam Vice President, that within countries, the law of land should prevail. International action, if any, must respect sovereignty and be at the request of the country concerned. With this, I thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from India, Egypt. You may take the floor.
السيدة نائب الرئيس، السادة رؤساء الوفود، السيدات والسادة، يسعدني بداية التنويه إلى أن بدء إدراج موضوع اللاجئين على أجندة اجتماعات منظمة الإلكو جاء من خلال مبادرة لحكومة جمهورية مصر العربية عام 1964، وهو الأمر الذي ساهم بكل تأكيد في استكشاف وضع سياسات الحماية للاجئين والنازحين في الدول الأعضاء وتسليط الأضواء على هذه المشكلة التي تفاقمت في المنطقة عبر السنين. تعد مصر من أكثر الدول المستقبلة للاجئين والنازحين في المنطقة نتيجة تدهور الأوضاع الأمنية وزيادة حدة التوترات وتفاقم النزاعات في العديد من الدول المجاورة، مما أدى إلى زيادة مضطردة في تدفقات اللاجئين على الأراضي المصرية في السنوات الأخيرة من عدة دول، من بينها إريتريا، إثيوبيا، العراق، الصومال، سوريا، فضلا عن اللاجئين الفلسطينيين المقيمين في مصر. وهو تحدي حقيقي تخوضه حكومة جمهورية مصر العربية وتسعى جاهدة للتعامل معه بكل كفاءة وفاعلية بالتنسيق مع المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية ذات الصلة، وفي ظل ظروف دقيقة مرت بها الساحة الداخلية المصرية خلال العامين الماضيين. السيدة نائب الرئيس، اليوم ونحن نناقش مشكلة اللاجئين لابد أن ننظر إليها من منظور شامل وواسع، فلا يقتصر اهتمامنا على إيجاد آليات لاستيعاب اللاجئين في الدول المستقبلة وتقديم الدعم والمساعدات المادية وتوفير الخدمات الأساسية لهم، بل يجب أن يسهم المجتمع الدولي ككل في إيجاد حل لمشكلة اللاجئين وفقا لمبدأ التكافل الدولي وتقاسم الأعباء والمسؤوليات، وإيجاد التدابير الملموسة والفعالة لإيجاد حلول جذرية ودائمة لأسباب تفاقم هذه المشكلة في المنطقة. وأخيراً، فإنني أثني على جهود مفوضية الأمم المتحدة لشؤون اللاجئين في توفير الحماية اللازمة وما تقدمه من دعم ومساندة لحكومات الدول الأعضاء في المنطقة في هذا الشأن. وشكرا لحسن استماعكم.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Egypt. We would wish to conclude this session at 3:30, but I believe we can give UNHCR and ICRC 5 minutes each to make your contributions, and then we will conclude this session.
Thank you, Madam Vice President and distinguished delegates. Thank you for inviting UNHCR to your conference, and in particular for allowing us to be part of this particular session, which is of direct relevance to our mandate. We have taken note of the interesting presentations and issues that have been presented. I will very briefly just mention on behalf of UNHCR couple of observations or points regarding the relevance of international refugee law in situations of persons fleeing conflict and other situations of violence. The vast majority of people fleeing across borders today flee armed conflicts or other situations of violence. This includes people fleeing, as we heard already, conflict in Syria, the violence in Sudan, Darfur, Blue Nile, and South Kordofan regions, people fleeing the conflict in the Central African Republic, the interethnic violence in South Sudan, the various sub-regional conflicts in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and as also mentioned, the religiously motivated violence in the 3 northeastern states in Nigeria. In addition, forced displacement today is also inextricably linked to the human rights and the rule of law. The deterioration in the human rights situation, political instability, and poor governance systems in various countries have led to widespread violence, irrespective of whether or not this is a situation of armed conflict, and have compelled people to flee. Examples of such are the unrest in Myanmar, Arakan State, the protracted violence in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, but also the criminal and gang-related violence in Mexico and Central America. UNHCR appreciates that adjudicators are confronted with difficult questions when faced with claims from such persons, not least about the relationship between the 1951 Refugee Convention and regional instruments, and how the convention applies in such circumstances and whether this is done consistently. The key to a correct interpretation and application of refugee law instruments to people fleeing armed conflict and other situations of violence is to understand contemporary situations of conflict and violence. I will not go through all the elements of it, but when looking in general terms at the various causes and drivers of conflict, the actors involved in a conflict, the conduct and modes of violence and strategies they apply, and the direct as well as indirect effects it has on people, there are multiple threats and multiple reasons why people feel compelled to flee. So it is important to understand today's armed conflicts and violent situations because it will inform us of the legal framework that will and should be applicable in order to provide international protection. The principal protection regime to look at when providing international protection to people fleeing armed conflict and other situations of violence is the refugee protection regime. The primary instrument is, of course, the 1951 Refugee Convention. The 1951 Refugee Convention is as relevant today as it was more than 60 years ago. Nevertheless, the discrepancies between refugees recognized under the 1951 Refugee Convention on the one hand and the broader group of persons in need of international protection on the other arise in part from a lack of understanding contemporary armed conflicts, in part from the way in which the refugee definition in convention has been interpreted and applied. Over time, these discrepancies have been reduced through the adoption of regional refugee law instruments and complementary protection regimes. The relationship between the 1951 Refugee Convention and other instruments and other forms of protection needs to be clarified. So what makes the application of the Refugee Convention so difficult? Basically, this is a combination of a proper understanding of the conflict and the proper interpretation and application of the refugee definition. In 2012, UNHCR organized an expert roundtable in Cape Town, South Africa, which came up with a number of clarifications on this matter. One is that it's essential to understand the conflict, to analyze the background to the conflict and the factual situation in the country of origin in its proper context. Where conflicts are rooted in ethnic, religious, or political differences, or where the impact of the conflict or violence is experienced along ethnic, religious, political, social, or gender lines, persons fleeing such conflicts or violence may qualify as 1951 Convention refugees. In armed conflicts and other situations of violence, whole communities may suffer or be at risk of persecution. The fact that many or all members of particular communities may be equally at risk does not undermine the validity of any particular claim. And finally, in other words, there is no basis in the 1951 Convention for holding that in armed conflict or other situation of violence, an applicant needs to establish a risk of harm over and above that of others caught up in such situations. So in conclusion, a correct application of the 1951 Convention requires a solid understanding of the background, context, and factual situation on the ground by properly understanding the conflict, its history, its causes, its drivers, who are the armed actors involved, what modes of violence and strategies they apply, as well what are the effects of that. UNHCR in general, of course, encourages development of national asylum systems where they do not exist. And UNHCR would also, in conclusion, would like to call on the member states to uphold the Bangkok principles and to consider also removing the reservations in order to strengthen its effectiveness and its impact on the protection of refugees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, UNCR, for those viewpoints. May invite ICRC, but let's be mindful of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The International Committee of the Red Cross applauds the efforts of the ALCO Secretariat and its member states on having on its agenda the issue relating to the status and treatment of refugees. We also wish, Madam President, to recognize the efforts of the ALCO Secretariat insofar as determining principles in its Bangkok principles and subsequent documents to respond to the humanitarian needs relating to the status of refugees. Madam President, in addition to the existing international human rights law instruments which treat with the status and determination of refugees, the ICRC sees the Geneva Conventions as a complement to such instruments. In particular, we wish to recall the obligations under the Fourth Geneva Conventions, where in contexts of qualified armed conflicts, persons who may be considered internally displaced and or asylum seekers or refugees are also civilians and are entitled to basic guarantees under the Fourth Geneva Convention. In addition, Madam President, we recall the customary law status, which is also enshrined in the Fourth Geneva Convention, that of non-refoulement. We thank member states for having this issue discussed today, and the ICRC looks forward to its continued collaboration with ALCO member states and its secretariat on this very important topic.
Thank you very much. Delegates, I think we've done a commendable job in finishing within the time we'd set for ourselves. It's 3:30 now. I have the permission of the Secretary General to allow you to take a 10-minute break to stretch your legs, because we are now getting into the real half-day session on the selected items on the agenda of the International Law Committee. So you can stretch your legs, and please be back. So 3:45? By 3:45, ready to commence the next session. Thank you very much.